How do stocks trade? Grandma on the left has savings. The fellow on the right has stock. Grandma's going to buy the stock with her savings. The money in stock has to change hands. That's called settlement. In most countries, they change hands 2 or 3 days after the trade. That's called T+2 or T+3. And importantly, the money and stock change hands simultaneously. In the US, however, while we operate on a T+3 system, the mechanisms for exchanging money and stock have become divorced, so it's possible for money to settle whether or not the stock settles. In reality, grandmas aren't calling strangers making stock deals. We have stock brokers. Stock brokers work in places called broker-dealers or BDs. Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, E-Trade, they're all BDs. I'll represent them as blue circles. There are about 2,000 of them in this country, arranged in a hub and spoke system around a central organization called the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, also called the DTCC. The DTCC acts as a central back office for Wall Street, where 3 days after a trade, when it's time for money and stock to settle, it settles at the DTCC. How does it settle? Trades can be settled through the DTCC. In reality, however, settlement usually occurs within the DTCC. Grandma's talking to her broker, the fellow on the right talked to his. These brokerage houses have accounts at the DTCC, and when their customers are trading out at the spokes, what really happens is that the money and stock shift around within accounts at the DTCC. There's also something called X-clearing. That's when two broker-dealers settle directly with each other external to the DTCC. 2.5 billion shares per day trade on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. These trades settle through the DTCC, within the DTCC, and back and forth directly among broker-dealers via X-clearing. Let's get back to our simplified system of grandma and a stock seller and see how the system handles delays. Suppose they do a trade when it's time to settle. Grandma's money settles through the system, but something comes up that blocks the fellow from settling his shares through the system. There could be all kinds of legitimate problems. He might be using paper stock and it's stuck in a bank vault, or it's at home lost in the closet or something. Maybe he signed the wrong piece of paper on some form. For one reason or another, he can't settle the trade, and you don't want the system to just grind to a halt. So the system creates an IOU. But note, it's not an IOU for money. It's an IOU for stock. It gets sent through the system. Grandma doesn't see that as anything other than normal stock. Her brokerage account says that she holds stock, not an IOU for stock. In most respects, the whole system just sees this as normal stock. It's only in the back offices that keep track of what's an IOU and what isn't. Assume that on day T+4, T+5, the blockage clears up, the fellow is able to send his stock through the system and he wipes out his IOU. Great. Imagine, however, that a guy shows up who wants to game the system, taking advantage of this loophole I just described. He's a villain or a miscreant. I paint his desk red to remind you he's a miscreant. He performs a trade with Grandma. 3 days later, her money comes through the system. But he says, you know what? Something's blocking me from sending my share. So he creates an IOU and sends it through the system. Does it again, and again, and again. But imagine he doesn't really have a blockage keeping him from settling his shares. In fact, maybe he doesn't have any stock. What he's doing is gaming the settlement system so that he ends up with Grandma's money, and all he's done is issue some stock IOUs to Grandma. He's failed to deliver the stock that he sold. That's a strategic failure to deliver. It's strategic in the sense of deliberate. It's not an honest error. He just exploited a loophole. In 2006, people are saying naked short selling, and they're saying fraudulent stock transfer. There are subtle differences, but the common denominator is that the IOUs are not sincere IOUs. They were strategically created. We're going to mark them as FTDs, for failure to deliver, and paint them as red, just to make them easier to track. How does this look at our hub and spoke system? Notice the miscreant on the right has the red desk. I'm going to paint his BD red too to signify that the BD might be a crook like his client, or maybe the BD is the crook. Maybe the BD's honest, but it's a broker who turns a blind eye to his miscreant client because the client is, say, a big hedge fund that gives him millions of dollars a month in commission. So he starts trading with grandma. The FTDs flow through the DTCC and bounce around within the DTCC. If, say, for every 100 legitimate shares, there's one FTD, the system's going to keep on working. It's not going to grind to a halt. But if we ever reach the point where for every 100 legitimate shares, there's 50 or 100 or 200 of these FTDs, it'll become like sand in the bearings of the economic engine. Now look at the effect on a company. I'll show you basic supply and demand curves. Imagine there's a stock with a certain amount of demand out there, a certain amount of supply, and the point where they meet is $40. The miscreant shows up and starts gaming the system. He sends out FTDs. Since the system sees these FTDs as normal stock, he's increasing the supply of stock, of a parent stock, and when you increase supply, you shift the supply curve to the right. He does it again, generating FTDs, shifting the supply line to the right as he goes. Eventually, he shifts the supply line far to the right. Now notice where the supply and demand lines cross. Of course, the price collapses. The $40 stock turns into a penny stock. Most investors think penny stocks are the Wild West. They stay away, so demand dries up. As demand dries up, a ceiling forms over the stock. The FTDs in the upper right started off life as stock IOUs and sincere stock IOUs, but IOUs just the same. Now that it's a penny stock, these FTDs become penny IOUs. Penny stock, penny IOUs. The fellow at the right has the money, the firm's a penny stock. A vicious cycle ensues where the company collapses. Other businesses stay away from the firm. They say, gee, it's a penny stock. Is it going to be around? They stop doing business. Capital markets shun the firm. If you're a penny stock, you can't go into the world and raise capital. So as it loses customers and can't access the market, it can't recover. Society loses the products and technologies that were offered, and because the companies that come under these kinds of attacks are often software and small pharmaceutical companies and high-tech companies, because it's possible to create the most confusion about them. So when the next Microsoft or Genentech is destroyed, society loses those technologies. Shareholder value is wiped out, jobs are destroyed, not just those today, but those that the company would have created over its life cycle had it not been strangled in its crib. And ironically, the miscreant keeps his cash and often does not even pay taxes for an arcane reason I won't go into here, but he generally gets away without paying taxes. Now consider a scarier question. What does the situation look like if there's not just shorting, but naked shorting? Remember our miscreant. Let's assume he generated millions of FTDs into the system. What does his squeeze look like? If shorting has gone on, this not just the normal borrowing and then shorting of stock, but naked shorting, been scattering these FTDs all over the system. And when the fellow goes to cover, there are more FTDs in the system than there is real stock to be bought. So as he tries to buy stock to deliver against his short, he gets in trouble. The supply and demand line shift so far that they don't meet anymore. There is no market price. The market snaps. That's volatility. And that's what the SEC wants to avoid. Why? Remember that a lot of this money isn't in the system anymore because as the price went down, the miscreant was able to withdraw his money out of his short position. So that money's been turned into mansions and Ferraris in the Hamptons and in Greenwich, Connecticut. And in any case, perhaps enough FTDs have been issued that the squeeze would take the price far beyond where the price was when the shorting occurred, so that it will take more money to cover than was taken out of the short position. If this fellow is forced to cover, he'll use all his money covering a fraction of the failures. But he's going to run out of money before he runs out of IOUs to cover, so he's gone. The broker-dealer could be in the same situation. In fact, if a buy-in really occurs, the price could get high enough that there'd be more FTDs in the system than liquidity in the system, in which case you would see a wave of failures move through the system like this. I know that sounds crazy. Systemic failures like that don't happen, right? Well, they did with the S&Ls 15 years ago, but this couldn't happen with Wall Street, right?